Welcome, everyone. Let us align and focus. In this time prior to the Wesak festival and the Taurus Full Moon, we approach our study of the dissipation of glamour with purity of motive, inspired by a loving heart. Master Dwal Kul says, right spiritual motive involves merging of the personality's self-will into that of the sacrificial will of the soul. At this time, in the cycle of astrological progression this year, we find in Taurus the entire secret of divine purpose and planning is hidden in this sign. And purpose is passive. So we will focus today on the will, for the will is active. As Master Dwal Kul instructed his disciples working to become trained observers in the New Age and to prepare to dissipate glamour, dispel illusion, and devitalize Maya, we meet as close as possible to the exact time of the full moon in each zodiacal sign to study together. This month in the sign of Taurus, bringing particular potency to our work and service. At the Wesak festival, we continue the awakening of the Ajna center of the planetary body, the new group of world servers.
Forward in our study and use of the formula of the dissipation of glamour, today we endeavor to deepen our understanding of the act of will. So let us keep in mind the nature of the will. The secret of the will lies in the recognition of the divine nature of man. Only this can evoke the true expression of the will. It has in fact to be evoked by the soul, as it dominates the human mind and controls the personality. The secret of the will is also closely tied in with the recognition of the unconquerable nature of goodness and the inevitability of the ultimate triumph of good. This is not determination. It is not whipping up and stimulating desire so that it can be transmuted into will. It is not an implacable, unshakable, immovable focusing of all energies in the need to triumph. The will pouring forth from Shambhala at this time of the Vesak festival. Our aim is to embody spiritual discernment, practice positive harmlessness, and eventually achieve a state of divine indifference. As we dispel illusion, dissipate glamours, devitalize Maya in all our relationships.
Before we begin, let us align as soul and as a group and see our group approaching Master Dwalkul's study. Sound together as one with the group and one with the new group of world servers. I am one with my group brothers and sisters, and all that I have is theirs. May the love of the one soul pour forth to all. May the energy of the one soul lift and aid all. May the thoughts which the soul creates reach and encourage all. May the energy of the divine self be spread abroad in our hearts, through our groups, and throughout the world.
As Master DK says, to the man, therefore, who undertakes wholeheartedly the process of occult meditation, I would say with all conciseness, know thyself. Proceed slowly and with caution. Study effects. Those who are in preparation for initiation must learn to work consciously with glamour. They must work effectively with the presented truth, ignoring any pain or suffering or mental questioning which is incident to personality rebellion and limitation. They must cultivate that divine indifference to personal considerations which is the outstanding hallmark of the trained initiate. What is required of the individual? 3 stages. Practiced meditation, deep reflection upon the nature of thought and its uses, and developed awareness of the light within, established as related activities, habits, and automatic reactions. And when the intention is fixed and the ability to focus has become an almost instinctual reaction, then sound and effective work can be done. To this work must be added persistence and patience. Master DK's instructions to remember. Exercise the deepest watchfulness in the endeavor to work thus on the astral plane. You are to work in one of the most difficult spheres of activity, perhaps the most difficult to which a disciple can be called, and hence the advisability of working there in group formation. I cannot emphasize too strongly that you are to work as a group and not as individuals. Always watch with care for the undue stimulation of your astral or emotional nature, with consequent and subsequent glamour. Group will. A group of disciples must be distinguished, as I already told you, by poor reason, which will steadily supersede motive, merging eventually into the will aspect of the monad, its major aspect. It is, technically speaking, Shambhala in direct relation with humanity. What, therefore, is the group will in any ashram or master's group? Is it present in any form vital enough to condition the group relations and to unite all into a band of brothers, moving forward into the light? Is the spiritual will of the individual personalities of such strength that it negates the personality relation and leads to spiritual recognition, spiritual interplay, and spiritual relation? It is only in consideration of these fundamental effects of standing as a group in the head's clear light that it is permissible for a disciple to bring into the picture personal sensitivities of thought, and this only because of a group temporary limitation. Silently sound the soul mantra, and in that soul silence fuse and blend your personality will with the will of the soul. I am the soul. I am light divine. I am love. I am will. I am fixed design. My will is now to lift the lower self into the light divine. Such is my will.
As we reviewed in previous sessions, keep this list of the general categories of glamour at hand as we continue to develop our ability to dispel and dissipate glamour and illusion as individuals and move to the dissipation of group glamour. Martine, would you read this for us, please?
Yes. I would suggest that no aspirant attempt to tackle the problem of glamour as a whole, or seek to dissipate all the glamours to which he is susceptible. He is dealing with a very ancient evil and with firmly established habits of glamour. They are closely connected with aspects of his daily living, with his sex life, and with his ambition, with his relations to other people, with his pet ideals and ideas, his dreams and visions. He should choose the glamour that is the most apparent and the most hindering at any given time, and there is always one. And for its dissipation, he should work conscientiously. If he would lay the foundation for effective service in the dissipation of world glamour. What is currently hindering your process within group formation? Moving from desire to personal will, to soul personality will, to group will?
As we're told, we must continue to work on individual glamours, even as we move to dissipate group and eventually world glamour. Yvonne, would you read this for us, please?
Two things will be apparent to you. First, that those participating in the eradication of glamour must be able to distinguish between glamour and the reality. These often closely resemble each other on a superficial examination. They must be in a position to recognize that an emotional or astral condition constitutes a veil over the truth and is a distortion of the presentation or the appearance of the individual's or the group's expression of divinity. They must, therefore, be capable of vision, clear thinking, and prompt recognition as to what is preventing the materializing of that vision and the accurate reception of the truth. They must also be able to distinguish between a major and a minor glamour. A minor glamour, a passing, evanescent thought form of an easily recognizable nature, does not warrant the use of either of the formulas. Such a minor glamour would be a sense of self-pity in the individual, or the glorification of some notable individual by an individual, a group, or a nation. Time and common sense suffice to take care of such a situation. A major glamour in the world prior to the war was the emphasis put upon possessions and the belief that happiness was dependent upon things and upon material good and comfort.
And would you continue?
I advise that some glamour, which all the group members recognize as a major hindrance to the progress of humanity, be one of the first handled by the group. I would also advise that in the early stages of their work, they deal with a glamour affecting aspirants, and that they do not attempt to tackle the more widely spread and deeply centered glamours of the race as a whole. Let them develop facility in handling some of the lesser and more easily visualized glamours. Then, as time goes on and facility in the work is gained, the group can pass to the more difficult tasks and handle the glamours further removed from their own orbit of difficulties. It is surely needless for me to point out that the group members be but those who are endeavoring to keep their own lives free from glamour. I would also add that if a group member is in the thick of glamour himself and is occupied with wrestling with it, he should abstain from the group work until he has freed himself with the aid of the individual formula.
Thank you. An important instruction for us to consider at any time, but particularly important now as aspirants and disciples and initiates are turning their attention toward 2025.
Remember that the 3 stages of focusing the light constitute a preparatory process. These 3 stages must be somewhat developed before effective use of the formulas can be possible, and those intending to work at the task of ridding the world of glamour must subject themselves constantly to these phases in the art of polarization, if I might so call it. They must have an understanding of the apparatus of thought, of the creation of thought forms, and of the nature of the thinker. They must be emotionally polarized, yet in group work relatively free from astral control. This astral liberation must, to a certain extent, control the choice of those who are to work at major dissipations. And this is the reason that we are taking so much time and practice with the individual formula. The individual who is seeking to break up glamour in his individual life, he should be mentally polarized by decision and effort, even if the emotional nature is for him in any one life the line of least resistance. Those working in group formation will have achieved a measure of mental focus, but for the purpose of the work to be done, they will focus themselves consciously and deliberately upon the emotional plane through their control of their natures. Workers must therefore have practiced meditation, must have reflected much upon the nature of thought and its uses, and must be aware of the light within.
So as we move along in this, our 4th session, considering the dissipation of glamour, we focus today with a deeper consideration of the act of the will, a major part of the technique of light in the group formula. Over time, we need to learn how to distinguish between personal desire and self-will, between self-will and personality will, between personality will and soul personality will, soul personality will and spiritual will, and recognize our progress toward eventually becoming aware of hierarchical will.
Sound the protective formula, making the sign of the cross of divinity, the long-armed vertical cross, touching the forehead, center of the chest, left eye, and right eye. Forehead. As a soul, I work in light. Chest. And darkness cannot touch me. Left eye. I take my stand within the light. Right eye. I work. And from that point, I never move.
From the highest point in the head center, sound a silent Om. Martine, would you continue?
By an act of the creative imagination, endeavor to see and hear the soul, the source of light and power in the three worlds, breathing out the Om into the mind of the attentive waiting personality. There, the light and power of the soul is retained and held by the positive personality, for a negative attitude is not desirable. The first essential relation in all creative work, positive and negative, achieving the positive, personality attitude, natural affinity. A positive integrated personality infused with soul, retained and held.
And then from that positive point, as the soul fuses with the dual light of the mind and the brain, from that point, the light then is turned to the astral plane. From positive to negative, receptive. The astral plane being seen as receptive of the great searchlight. Would you continue, please?
The retained light and power combined with the dual light of the personality focus, as we know, on the mental plane, is seen, generating an intense light which can be visualized as a searchlight of great brilliance and strength. It must be seen as a sphere of vivid, brilliant light, but not yet radiating out or projecting outwards. The light of the soul is seen on its own plane. The light of the soul is seen radiating onto the mental plane. The light of the personality and the light of the concrete mind unite. And the soul radiates in unison with these two lesser lights. The light of soul, the three united lights then radiate together as soul light onto the astral plane. Never onto or into the astral body.
Master DK goes on to tell us that aspirants and disciples must cultivate the consciousness of cooperation and realization, that in service such as is proposed, they are definitely participating in a hierarchical activity and are therefore in a position to render help even if they could not, alone and unaided, achieve the desired results. They or we can hasten the process with our combined help. The power of united effort upon the physical plane is being realized today on a large scale, and the war effort that was in play in all countries when DK wrote these teachings has greatly hastened this realization. The power of unified emotion, often expressing itself in what is called mob psychology, is everywhere recognized and feared as well as exploited. So we move in a completely different level of activity, we prepare as a positive soul-lighted group to direct this light, a searchlight, that is then directed onto a negative astral plane in this creative activity.
To dare. These words give the clue to the subordination of the personality and have a close connection with the great clearinghouse of desire and of the astral forces, and also the main center of the transmutative work. Humanity, we dare to serve and embody goodwill.
Catherine, I don't know if you can actually read today. If you're able to, would you please?
Yes, I can. Are you becoming more assured that you can easily and readily achieve the altitude of the observer and sustain that as the mind held steady in the light on the mental plane, merging and blending the two lesser lights, brain and mind, with soul light? You might ask, how would I know that I have achieved the needed concentration, realization, and relationship? Now consider what is required of a group.
Would you continue?
Let us consider some important teachings from Master DK that are pivotal to our service as a group. Desire is the lowest reflection within the human consciousness of the will aspect. The potent vibration of purely material desire attracted the attention of certain purely evil energies or beings. These beings availed themselves of the situation in order to satisfy their desire for power against a distortion of the will of first aspect. Thus, the Black Lodge was founded in order to protect against the power of any materialistic threat or influence as one proceeds along the path.
Would you continue?
Yes, it is not what the disciple seeks, or wants or desires, which should condition him and drive him to what we might call ashramic acquiescence, but the all-impelling motive of world need. So the disciple begins to rid himself of desire by a process of attrition. He does not positively fight desire with a view to its elimination. He does not seek to transmute it, as should the probationary disciple, but he ceases to give it any recognition. He fails to provide it with the needed stimulation of attention, for as ever, energy follows thought. He is preoccupied with world need and with the service he can render, and, almost inadvertently as it were, desire dies of attrition.
It is not
Apologies, Heike. I know I had put some pre-recordings in, but let's move on. Assuming that moving from the probationary path to the path of discipleship, that powerful desire has died of attrition because we pay no attention to it. And aspirants have to learn the nature of the will by the power of inner illumination and by certain intelligent recognitions. And this inner illumination is greatly aided at this time of the full moon of Taurus. Aspirants learn the nature of the self through the aid of the personality, the shadow, or the distortion of the divine will. And keep that in mind, that our personality will is but a distortion of the divine will. And only when the will of the personality and the will of the soul come together, evoked by love, does the light of the soul dominate the material light of the personality. They pass from the expression of the will, which is purely selfish, self-sufficient, and self-focused, to the grasp of the group will and to the effort to embody that group will. And we might suggest that this is something that we are all in the process of doing at this point in our development along the path of discipleship. Beginning to grasp the group will and making an effort to embody that group will. And this group will is always concerned with that which is not the will of the separated self. Let's test and see if this is pre-recorded or not. It is not. So, Yvonne, would you read this for us, please?
A group is brought together under karmic law, ashramic necessity, and soul direction. Immediately, there is presented to the watching masters an opportunity for the very definite training of some willing aspirants, but also an equally definite point of tension, indicating real difficulty. There is little in reality to link these people except inclination, a joint aspiration, and a goal seen and held in unison. The outstanding characteristic of such a group is spiritual selfishness. This statement may surprise you until a close scrutiny of your own heart is undergone. And then I venture to predict that you will discover that it is not divine love of humanity that has enabled you to find your way into the outer group of some ashram, but desire for development, for achievement, and for liberation. The first step, therefore, is to recognize this, and hence the injunction so often misunderstood: kill out desire. This has to be the first destructive activity of the disciple.
And it may be one of the questions that we need to ask ourselves as we begin to endeavor to develop the ability to work as a group in the dissipation of group glamour and eventually world glamour. Martine, would you read this for us, please?
For long, aspirants have noted and have been taught the effect of the will upon the astral or emotional body. It is one of the primary and most elementary of the initial tensions installed upon the probationary path. It leads to the purifying and the reorganizing of the entire psychic and emotional life as the result of its destructive action. It is the will that, in the last analysis, produces orientation, focus, emphasis, the will of form, and above all else, because of its relation to the world of cause, the world of meaning. The group life as a whole is needed to make possible a somewhat new attitude, this shift in realization away from form and consciousness to the will and life aspect or principle.
This may be a very difficult passage for many because most who are on the probationary path, the orientation and the focus and the emphasis into the world of meaning is from an individual perspective. And this is usually the process that is used in most esoteric schools of study. And so we're embarking on a completely different approach to orientation as a group, focus as a group, emphasis as a group in the world that is the world of meaning in relation to the dissipation of glamour and dispelling of illusion on the astral and the plane of the concrete mind, which is going to require the development of group will that most of us are not particularly adept at this point in time. And yet we can utilize what Master D.K. says was said to the children of the race and the beginners upon the path of conscious return. If we will only think, if we will only use a little will, and if we will only remember that we have a mind and we are developing group mind, then little by little the focus and orientation shift out of the astral life and the emotional life of consciousness and the mental life of the individual, and consequently into a reflection of the world of purpose found in the three worlds. And that when this stage has been somewhat developed, we follow on to the path of discipleship and the preparation for initiation, in an effort to grasp and understand the higher aspects of this mental process. And the will aspect of the egoic life begins to influence us. The petals of sacrifice unfold, and the sacred, sacrificial aspect of life is revealed in its beauty, purity, simplicity, and in its revolutionizing quality. So as we move forward together, let us focus on this will aspect of our egoic and soul life as a group, that the petals of sacrifice will unfold, and this sacred, sacrificial aspect of life is revealed in its beauty, purity, simplicity, and in its revolutionizing quality. So let us pause to dare. Let us dare to see, utilizing a visualization, our personal desires falling away as we focus the triple lights of the mind, the soul, mind, and brain. Pause to dare to see the personal desires fall away. Sound an Om inaudibly, causing the dross, anything residual, to become silent, entering into the silence of the soul. Eventually to hear the note of your own soul and in our work together, the note of the group soul. From that note, sound inaudibly that note, bringing a feeling of purity, clarity, transmutation of all limitations, and a great liberation, sensing a freedom from all limitations and entry into soul consciousness. Each day, every day, achieve this highest point and sound inaudibly an Om into the group soul field, that we may be united in our work together. Hear the notes of the group members and those joining us subjectively and those joining us from the other side of the veil. Now bring that soul light into relationship with the light of mind and the light of the brain, so that you may bring and anchor that soul sound and light into the searchlight that you generate as part of the group field. And from that anchored point, the triple light, sound an inaudible Om and listen for the group Om to imbue our field with soul personality will to evolve, to initiate this group soul process. And the will to express as a group as we move forward together. Now withdraw the consciousness back to the mind and the group working together to better understand the act of will. Breathing in effortlessly and easily, we see our group moving through the field of lotus blossoms to the Master's study. Each time we gather, we pause at the ivory door, and as the Master opens and greets us, he invites us in, that we approach his teachings as a discipleship group. Today, in the energies of Taurus, as we continue our study. The 3 windows in the study are filled with light, and we stand in silence as he turns and faces the east. And together we enter with him into the great point of light, hearing the note of the soul, visualizing the light of the soul, using the light of the mind and the light of matter or brain. We practice this daily, the merging and blending, and recognizing and feeling the intent of the soul, so that we are able to focus at that high point and use the triple light. Now let us look very briefly at some of the glamours that may be part of our group Dissipation of Glamour work. Array 1, the glamour of self-imposed will upon others and upon groups. Array 2 glamour, the glamour of personal wisdom or of selfish responsibility. There are several here that may impact us. The 3rd ray glamour of being busy, finding the time, endeavoring to work together as a group can be time consuming. How do we address this glamour as a group? The 4th ray glamour, the glamour of harmony aiming at personal comfort, personal satisfaction. The glamour of knowledge and of definition. Is that impacting the group? Is it seen and known by disciples and aspirants throughout the world in the different esoteric groups? The glamour of loyalties and of creeds, the 6th ray glamour. Is this impacting esoteric groups? Groups working to serve on behalf of the ashrams and the masters? Is the loyalty or creed to a certain way of doing it inhibiting them? And the glamour of magical work. With the incoming 7th ray, this glamour is affecting many who have yet to move through the 3rd initiation. So he has given us many glamours. Their names are legion, as he says, and they by no means cover the possibilities or the field of glamour. So let's look at the point where we have been in our studies, the formula for individuals, and look at the important components of the group formula as we shift to work on group glamour. In the individual formula, we use the evocation of the will as an individual within the searchlight of the mind. And now, in the group formula, we will act to invoke the will, which is that which DK has taught us is this higher will. And we will be using the act of penetration in a new way as a group. So, Yvonne, would you read this passage about the difference between evocation and invocation?
What is the difference between evocation and invocation? In the individual formula for the technique of light, we evoke the will behind the searchlight of the mind. The evocation of the will involves identity with the larger purpose. The little will of the little lives must be merged in the larger will of the whole. The response of that which has been reached, the success of the invocative rite. Individual purpose must be identified with group purpose, which is as much of the purpose of the whole, or the one life, as the little life can grasp at any given point in time and space. In the group formula for the technique of light, we invoke by an act of the will. The task of the lesser aspect or group is invocative. Where, however, real love exists, it will produce the lessening of the personality will, the evocation of the sacrificial will, and a constantly growing capacity to identify the group with the will or purpose of the monad. This group love is based upon the egoic aspect of the will, to which we give the name sacrificial love. This does not connote happy relationships between individual members of the group. It might presumably lead to unhappy outer, superficial interplay. But basically, it leads to an unalterably staunch loyalty underlying the surface of the outer life. Definition of love is that synthetic, inclusive grasp of the life and needs of all beings. I have chosen these two words with intent, which it is the high prerogative of a divine Son of God to operate. It negates all that builds barriers, negates all that makes criticism, negates all that produces separation. It sees no distinction, even when it appreciates need. And it produces in one who loves as a soul immediate identification with that which is loved.
Thank you, Yvonne. I included this because in my own experience with groups, this is one of the most difficult distinctions to understand and to really use, this difference between evocation and invocation. And I must admit, it was a point in my own learning decades ago that I had to really integrate in my own being to truly understand, as was the importance of this definition of love, what love truly is. So it's something for us to really consider in terms of what we previously read from the Tibetan in terms of will, that this capacity to identify the group with the will or purpose of the monad is the important piece. And that is why I think Master DK distinguishes the individual formula from the use of the group formula, because that is a very, very tremendous transition. And if you're dealing with students who are on the beginning end of their studies, or at points in their life where they're being demanded to do much in terms of the outer field of expression in work and family and community, that they're participating in the dissipation of group glamour and world glamour is really too much to do at the point in time they are in their development. And to be cognizant of that and to not be critical of people who choose to study, but to not really activate within the group field as we move forward together. They're doing it because it's not really appropriate for them to participate at this point in their evolution. He goes on and tells us about the formulas of approach, and this is in terms of any of the formulas that he gives, that these formulas, and he says, are eventually enable us to express the significance of the words of Christ, life more abundantly, in the quality. And that is another big leap for many to understand this quality that we are embodying when we use these formulas of approach. And the result is the expression of the will aspect. And he goes on to say the whole process of invocation and evocation is tied up with this idea. And the lesser aspect is ever the invoking factor. And this constitutes an unalterable law lying behind the entire evolutionary process. It is necessarily a reciprocal process, which we know and understand, but in time and space, it might be broadly said that the lesser ever invokes the higher, and the higher factors are then evoked and respond according to the measure of understanding and the dynamic tension displayed by the invoking element. And this was mentioned in our, actually not mentioned, but actually we went through the whole process of invocation and evocation in terms of the Taurus and Wesak festival, that there are these 4 accomplishments of that invocation and evocation that occurs at that momentous point of the Wesak Taurus full moon moment, the 8 minutes that the Buddha descends and is in contact with the hierarchy, bringing those higher energies in, and that we then have that responsibility as one of the groups, the new group of world servers, to invoke and have an understanding and be able to maintain this dynamic tension. And he says this many fail to realize, and we know ourselves that probably many of us failed to realize the importance of that invocation and evocation as part of the Taurus full moon when we first started practicing it. And also that you do not work at the evocative process. That's another important thing. That word simply connotes the response of that which has been reached. So if we reach those high points, the evocation is a natural response. The task of the lesser aspect or group is invocative, and the success of the invocative rite is called evocation. It's complicated, I think, in terms of really integrating and understanding the importance of our point of tension and our role as invocative factors. Catherine, would you read this for us, please?
First, he, as a disciple, has to learn to work within the framework of his blending soul personality. This task at first takes the form of character building and disciplining, while on the probationary path, of a struggle to see, of an endeavor to make a continuity of his soul's contact.
And I'll share with you when I first started doing the dissipation of glamour work training with a group, and then we went back to our home spots to engage others and to do the glamour work. A very long time friend and colleague of mine was completely disenchanted by the glamour work, partially because of ray orientation and partially because of where this individual was in terms of their blending soul personality work. And I think we may find this with those that we attempt to engage in doing the glamour dissipation. Catherine, would you continue, please?
Life is. Naught in heaven or on earth can touch or affect it. This is a point oft forgotten. The rule 6 for applicants, as given to applicants, consequently concerns their ability to accept and adhere to a self-imposed discipline. Through the means of that discipline, the control of the physical and astral natures are demonstrated by the applicant to himself, and the effect of the discipline is to reveal to him certain inevitable and basic weaknesses, such as control of the animal nature, the powerful imposition of desire, a sense of superiority, of pride and separateness. His ability to sustain the discipline and his appreciation of himself for so doing, plus a sense of superiority to those who are not so disciplined, are all indicative of essential weaknesses. This may be an example of the glamour of the physical body, plus the glamour of self-centeredness and personal potency over emphasis of form. His fanaticism, blatant or expressed, emerges in his consciousness with clarity, and when he is sincere, he is conscious of having brought about a measure of physical purity. But at the same time, he is left with the awareness that he is perhaps maybe starting with the outer and the obvious, when he should be beginning with the inner, and with that which is not so easily contacted or expressed. This is great and most important lesson.
And it's so wonderful how Master DK in his writings gives us examples that we can often personally understand, or we know we've observed in group relations in terms of the way that individual glamours will pop up in group dynamic. Martine, would you move forward with reading on this slide?
Developed will expresses itself as tension, esoterically understood. It embodies the ideas of orientation, implacable determination, ability to wait, and to preserve intention and orientation unmoved by aught which may occur. It also involves the determination to take the intended action, always of a creative nature and based on loving understanding. The psychological moment, right timing, or that exact moment which the psyche or soul determines to be correct.
And as we are told that patience and persistence are demanded of us, it's important for us to remember that patience is a quality of will. It is of the nature of a strict adherence to a fixed intention. And I included this particular section from the Rays and Initiations because we are at a point of transition. At each transition from one civilization to another, each being built upon the cultural seed of the preceding one, after a due flowering of the civilization, we could say of Sanat Kumara what has been said of the Christ, that he sees of the travail of his soul and is satisfied. So blind are men that when a civilization comes to an end, when the familiar mode of cultural expression is brought, as is usual, under the hand of the destroyer, humanity regards it as a major disaster and dreads and fears the ruin which usually surrounds such an event. But from the standpoint of the world's significances, progress is seen and the day of fulfillment draws much nearer. One of the things that we will need to continuously remind ourselves is that we are at the end of one civilization, and this is a passage that is beginning into the new civilization. So this patience, this quality of the will to not allow ourselves to have kamamanasik and emotional responses to those events that are part of this destruction of the current civilization and the beginning of the flowering of the next civilization. As we learn to tread the path of discipleship and serve to dissipate all three types of glamour, as he defines them, Maya, glamour, and illusion, we must remember that these characteristics are, however, only the reaction of humanity to the activities of the Deva evolution, rightly and divinely proceeding with their task of implementing the divine will. Big idea to understand, to grasp, and to accept. Within the sphere of their activity comes into contact within the human intelligence the effect upon humanity, humanity before mastery is gained. And that is to compel men to wander in the fields of Maya, to drown in the sea of glamour, and to respond to the pull of illusion. This is part of Rule 10 in the Rays and the Initiations. Rule 10 for disciples and initiates. And those rules were given to inform those who had passed the third initiation, the first major initiation. So this is something really important for us to acknowledge, and probably not something that we can truly understand. That it is the foundation of this responsibility to dissipate glamour on an individual level, all that we've contributed, and to dissipate group glamour and eventually work to dissipate world glamour. Big job ahead of us. After progress in killing out desire, the next step is the destruction of the ties which link the personalities of the group members. And I don't know how many of you are in-person groups or even in online groups where you have really strong personality relationships. And this is one of the most difficult things in relation to glamour, is the destruction of those ties. And these must be severed, and the relationship between the group members must be on the basis of soul activity, joint pledge to the master of the ashram, and united service given to humanity. These two spiritually destructive processes, the destruction of desire and the severing of all personality ties, are the first two and essential results of true group work. So think about what your own process is in the assuming of relationship to soul and to group soul. That what you visualize falling away is the personality attachment, the ties. So that those are no longer in your field of expression. How does one accomplish that? The third quality, which must be utterly rooted out and destroyed, is that of all reaction towards recognition, whether that recognition is accorded by the world of men, by other disciples, or by the master. The ability to work without any token of recognition, to see others claim the reward of action taken, and even to be unaware that the results of the good initiated by the individual disciple or his group are claimed by others, are the hallmarks of the hierarchical worker. And in my experience, I must say that I do credit Lucis Trust with having achieved this ability as a working discipleship group with ashramic affiliation. That group functions without any need for recognition in a very advanced way. And I think we all can probably attest to that. These three types of work along the lines of destruction merit your careful consideration. And because they are along the lines of the destroying aspect, it will be apparent to you that the method employed is that of the utilization of the group will. It will be equally apparent that the group will can only make its appearance under the law of occult continuity, when and if the group is functioning intelligently and demonstrating love adequately. Martine, would you read this for us as we get closer to our closing?
I would ask you all, therefore, to ponder on the distinction which exists between self-will, determination, fixity of purpose, the will, the spiritual will, the divine will. I shall not attempt to discuss these words with you. They each indicate a certain aspect of the will. You will learn more on this point by doing your own thinking and defining. All that I can hope and pray is that your individual will can be merged into the divine will. That revelation will be increasingly yours, and then you will, with increased steadfastness, thread the path from darkness to light and from death to immortality. The use of the will is not expressed by an iron fixation to stand steady and not yield to evil forces. determination, the focusing of energy, and the demonstration of an all-out effort towards victory were only, where the allies are concerned, the expression of a one-pointed desire for peace and for an ending of the trouble.
Yvonne, would you read this for us, please?
Aspects of the higher will begin to emerge in its lower reflections as we establish and act from a point of tension, that focused, immovable will. The point of tension is found when the dedicated will of the personality is brought in touch with the will of the spiritual triad. This takes place in three clearly defined stages, the first two of which we are accomplishing in our use of the technique of light, the formula for the dissipation of glamour. 1, lower will aspect is focused in the mental body. The will to activity of the personality expresses itself in the cultivation of goodwill. 2, the love aspect of the soul is brought into touch with the corresponding aspect of the triad. When the initiate grasps the intention of the divine creating logos, his goodwill expands into the will to good.
And we hold those intentions. We orient to those intentions as we begin our work together every time we begin. He goes on to say in other parts of his teachings that regarding the focused, immovable will, the thought of tension, which Master DK defines as the identification of brain and soul with the will aspect and the preservation of that identification unchanged and immovable, which is what we achieve when we focus the three lights in all circumstances and difficulties. The will aspect can be contacted only from the mental plane, and only those, therefore, who are working with and through the mind can begin to appropriate this energy. It's really an important distinction because there are many who function in the work of healing. And this is where our work in dissipation of glamour and dispelling of illusion is in a different category of relationship to the spiritual triad and the use of the will from what is done in many healing practices. So that's why we make a distinction here, because we wouldn't want to take people down the wrong road in terms of when we're dissipating glamour and illusion, how we're invoking this will in relation to the spiritual triad, which we are doing in the Wesak Festival. The point of tension is found when the dedicated will of the personality is brought into touch with the will of the spiritual triad. And this takes place in three clearly defined stages, the first of which is the stage wherein the lower will aspect is focused in the mental body. The will to activity of the personality is invoked, is brought into play at that time. It's brought into contact with the higher abstract mind, and this latter higher abstract mind is the interpreting agent for the monad and the lowest aspect of the triad. And two things can be noted in this respect. This contact becomes possible from the moment that the first thin strand of the Antakarana, the rainbow bridge, is completed between the mental unit and the monastic permanent atom. It's one of the reasons that we have used the constitution of man in the visualizations and the imagery of essential relations, because that first contact is so important for people to recognize and create realization of in their own being. This demonstrates in an absorbing devotion to the plan and is an effort at any cost to serve that plan as it is progressively understood and grasped. This expresses itself in the cultivation of goodwill as understood by the average intelligent human being and put into action as a way of life. And he goes on to tell us there are several reasons why the will presents a problem. The first reason is this energy of the will is the most potent energy in the whole scheme of planetary existence. It is called the Shambhala force and is that which holds all things together in life. It is in reality life itself. And it's one of the reasons why people are cautioned about thinning the veils too soon or the webs, because this Shambhala force is so destructive, and the life force or divine will implementing divine intention is that by means of which Sanat Kumara arrives at his goal. On a tiny scale, it is the use of one of the lowest aspects of the will, human self-will, which enables a man to carry out his plans and attain his fixed purpose, if he has one. Where the will is lacking, the plan dies out and the purpose is not achieved. The good news is desire, when massed and focused, can invoke will. Will, when evoked, ends desire and becomes an imminent, propulsive, driving force, stabilizing, clarifying, and among other things, finally destroying, which is what we are able to achieve when we bring together that higher group focus in the group dissipation of glamour. It is much more than this, but this is all that man can grasp at this time, and all for which he has as yet the mechanism of comprehension. He goes on to say, it is this will, aroused by invocation, which must be focused in the light of the soul and dedicated to the purposes of light and for the purpose of establishing right human relations, which must be used in love to destroy all that is hindering the free flow of human life, and that is bringing death, spiritual and real, to humanity. This will must be invoked and evoked. The spiritual will is something of which humanity knows nothing. It's hidden and veiled by the self-will of the individual and the group will of the soul. And a fusion occurs at the third initiation, when at the first time the initiate senses at the third initiation contacts the universal will and is able to say, Father, not my will, but thine be done. We discover then our major responsibility, spiritually speaking, and that is to permit no hindrance. Because we're going over time today, I'm not going to read all of these, but a portion of this I will read, that this free flow of life inspired by purpose comes from the free flow of love of the greater seven, from the planetary seven, the sevens in order. The most important part of this is that we need to understand that the supplementary seven are the seven centers in our bodies. and that we do not have control. Until we have control of those, we can't move too far in terms of really invoking the spiritual will, the higher spiritual will. We have to control those lower centers, have achieved a point of attainment from the angle of our own life and our own conscious direction, and that these are gradually developed, and that all of those potencies have to be developed before we can be trusted. And after the third initiation, the first real initiation, we can be trusted because we do not go back. Until that point, literally, we cannot be trusted. So we work in group formation. He tells us that men and women everywhere are attempting to rid themselves of glamour by the power of clear thinking, stern discipline, and common sense, and by a recording consciously of their relation to the whole, which prompts them to eliminate out of their lives all that could hinder others or increase world deception through glamour. To this will be added, perhaps as an aspect of the new world religion now on its way towards externalizing, the realization that groups can successfully clear away the glamours which darken humanity's way to its goal through the power of combined and projected thought. And that is what we are attempting to learn and to be able to do together. And we will do the act of will in our service together on Monday, where we will begin to implement use of the group formula. And this is what we will sound and utilize. And then the addition to the technique of light is the statement with power upon its beam. The light then is focused on the goal through our act of will together. And this mantra of light is utilized in that, and we'll sound it together as we begin to close today. And Martine, would you sound, I think it's not pre-recorded. Would you sound this for us, please?
Together and in vocal unison, the group says, radiance we are and power. We stand forever with our hands stretched out, linking the heavens and the earth, the inner world of meaning and the subtle world of glamour. We reach into the light and bring it down to meet the need. We reach into the silent place and bring from thence the gift of understanding. Thus, with the light we work and turn the darkness into day.
And all that we do is in love. Love is an aspect of the will. It is the will to draw into itself, or the will to attract into itself. And this will, when exerted toward that which is not material, we, in reaction to the differentiating mind, call it love. But humanity has to see that which must be loved before that power of the will is sufficiently evoked. And that we hope to do together at the time of the Taurus full moon and continuing toward the Gemini full moon. Then the vision can become a manifestation and a fact in expression. Owing to the world glamour, the true purpose and ideal set before our planetary forces by the all-creating will becomes distorted by many people. They are not polarized in the divine will, but are as yet centered in their personalities, and hence only the few appreciate the beauty of the intended group life, group purpose, and group fusion. Group living tends to the fulfillment of free will in service and a free subordination of the lower will to the higher purpose in group formation. Through the glamour contacted, however, this group activity in life becomes twisted into the imposed will and the concept of the superstate. This produces the imprisonment of the mind and the curtailment of all freedom, all free thought and free will. The man becomes the captive of the man-made state. So in our work together in Taurus, moving to Gemini, we are working toward the elimination of these hindrances and the freedom of humanity through the power of unified thought, the power inherent in the light of many minds, rendering us effective instruments in world affairs, penetrating and dissipating glamour, and proving creative upon the physical plane. And that this will prove to be a part of the new modes of work which will be employed in the new age. For this, the hierarchy has planned and worked, and it is now prepared to test the effectiveness of that work by organizing groups which will work upon the problem of glamour. So next month, as we build toward the Gemini full moon, our study will be the nature of thought, kama manas, ideas, ideals, and illusions. May we in Taurus see, and when the eye is opened, may all be light and true vision appear. Blessings to you all, and gratitude for your concentrated, dedicated group service in all the groups